Hello folks, so this video is going to be a little bit different from the rest of the Getting Started series. I've got this model here from a user who was wondering the best way to set it up for rendering with Podium, so I'm just going to record the entire process from start to finish. Now, this is going to be more of a process demonstration than an introductory tutorial, but it will give you the opportunity to see everything in real time. So I'll be explaining all my decisions along the way, but I won't really be explaining every single tool in the Podium interface. So if you've never used Podium before, I don't really recommend this as a starting point. I would suggest complete beginners watch the Getting Started series first before moving on to this one. Okay? Alright, let's get started. So this model was actually imported to SketchUp from Chief Architect, so it has some unique challenges that we wouldn't necessarily see if the project had been modeled in SketchUp. I think this will be an informative demonstration for anyone working with imported geometry, but the first section is mostly going to cover model cleanup and organization. So if you don't need to see this, just skip ahead using the timestamp links below. Alright, so let's take some steps to make this model a little bit easier to work with in SketchUp. Now, the first big challenge is that when it was exported from Chief Architect and then brought into SketchUp, everything came in as a single continuous object. So nothing is grouped, we don't have any layers, we're just working with plain geometry. Once I get inside this component, these are just raw SketchUp faces. If I zoom all the way in, even the door is attached. Nothing is grouped. So the first thing I want to do is get some of these objects onto separate layers and turn a few things off so we can see stuff better. This project is actually an interior project, so that's part of the reason we don't have much of a context around the model. All we've got is a ground plane and one or two trees outside here, but if I zoom down inside, you can see the interior is much more developed. And this is what we're going to be rendering in this demonstration. But let me go back outside because the first thing I want to do is get this roof grouped and then onto a new layer. Okay, so let's jump into a side view, or actually any of the orthographic views will work, and I just want to see if I can get this entire roof in a single selection. And that may have worked. Looks good. I just want to check and make sure I got all the faces and all the edges so that we're not ending up with geometry on two separate layers. Things are lagging a little bit. Okay, so we do have an extra edge here. I just want to make sure I deselect this top edge and this one. Yeah, okay, we're good. So I've got the roof selected. I'm going to right click, make group. And now that this is a group, we can easily hide it so that we can see into the space. And this just makes the model a little bit easier to work with when we're setting up lighting, materials, and all that other stuff. So I'm going to unhide last and instead put this on its own layer. Roof. And with this selected, in my layer dropdown, just add it to the roof layer, and now I can make that layer invisible. Okay, so first objective completed. Now, if this was my own model, I probably would take the time to go through and group all of these furniture items and put them on their own layers and get things organized just a little bit more. But for the purpose of this video, I don't think that's going to be necessary. I don't plan on moving any of the furniture around, so I don't think we really need to group most of this stuff. But if you're working on your own imported mesh, it wouldn't be a bad idea to come through and make some simple selections like this sofa here. Make sure I don't get this light fixture in. Deselect that. Right, and I could just right click, make group. And then we could start putting everything on a furniture layer. So drop that onto the furniture layer. And so if I ever wanted to hide all the furniture, or if I wanted to easily select and move the furniture, that's there for me. But I'm not going to go through and do that to the entire model and bore you with the process because really the objective here is just to set this up for rendering. So what do we want to focus on next? Something I did notice is that this table imported with really hard surface normals. And it's causing us to see the faceting on some of these edges pretty prominently. So I think these table legs especially will look better if we soften the edges. So I'm going to triple click and see what kind of selection we get. And luckily that's detached from the table, so that's going to give me the leg. I'm going to do all of these at the same time. So with shift held down, triple click again, triple click, triple click, and go ahead and select all of these logs that are making up these table supports. Whoops. Okay, I'm gonna make sure that my soften edges tray is showing, and it's not, so under Window, Default Tray, Soften Edges, I'm going to make sure Soften Coplanar is checked, and then I'm just going to increase the angle between normals. So that's going to cause the normals to smooth out a little bit, and most of those edges are going to disappear. We're still seeing the hidden geometry while it's selected, but as soon as I deselect these items, we won't see it anymore. I'm going to group this in case I need to select it again. It's always a decent policy in SketchUp to group things if you think you might need to select them later on. And we could do the same thing to all these chairs, but I don't think it's going to show quite as much. Maybe just this one that's going to be closest to the camera for the camera angle that I have in mind. So why don't I see if I can get it all in one go? Come up over the top here, drag out a box. We'll just do soften coplanar. Yeah, that worked pretty well actually. So I'm going to do all of these since it's going quickly. Okay, I think that's good for the table. Control T to deselect, and we'll move on to the next item. All right, we're getting pretty close to the end of the setup process. One last thing I want to check is the orientation of the faces in here. So as you may know, SketchUp faces have a front side and a back side, and you always want the front side to be visible to the camera. The back side of faces should always be on the interior of a volume. So if I come up to my styles up here and turn this to monochrome, you can see this model actually looks really good. If I'm seeing white, it means I'm seeing the front faces. If I'm seeing blue, it would be the back face in this model. And the only place where I'm seeing back faces is over here on the window, where it looks like we actually have what's called Z-fighting. So I think somehow there are actually two faces occupying the same plane. So if I select this and hit delete, that's eliminated that weird Z-fighting that we were seeing just a second ago. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Delete. Okay, so when this window was modeled, some of these faces got duplicated and also reversed. So I just need to select this, right click, and reverse it, and now it's white. So over here, same thing. Select, right click, reverse, and that's looking better. The reason this is important is because reversed faces can cause rendering artifacts. So what would happen is at the edge where a reversed face comes into contact with a correctly oriented face, you can get light photons that actually pass through that edge and show up in the render. So what you end up seeing in the final image is these blotches that we call light leaks. And it's just something you want to avoid, and so it's always a good idea to check your model for reversed faces. And it also can cause problems with textures not rendering if they're applied to the back face. So just give your model a once over and make sure you're seeing the front faces. And as I said, this model actually looks really good. We're seeing all white for the most part. Just looking around. Yeah, this looks good. We can fix anything else later if we need to. But let me go ahead and turn textures back on. I'm going to move back down into the model, and I think the next step for us is to find a composition that we want to render from. So what I'm going to do because I like nice squared up verticals. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to use a function under extensions, SU Podium version 2.6, tools, reset tilt. And what that does is it squares up the verticals in the image. So now I can compose a camera view that I want to render from. And I'm thinking I want the focal point to be this table with this really cool chandelier hanging over the top. We're going to get light coming in from the windows. And then I want to see a little piece of this kitchen. So let me go ahead and check what the field of view currently is. It's set to 35, which is pretty good. Maybe we can widen it a bit to, let's try 40. I think that'll be good. Right now we have these two vertical beams that we can almost frame the render with. So I'm going to get my camera height to about the height where a photographer would be. I'm looking straight down this table, and let's just turn on the roof layer to see what we're looking at. I'm going to move it to the left a little bit and get those 3 recessed lights in. I think that's going to be good for now. So I'm going to click the plus button here to save this as a scene. And now we have a scene that we want to render from. So I'm not going to make a test render yet because we haven't set up any lighting or materials, but this is going to give us a base to work from. So now I know I can just focus on the things that are in front of me and work on the objects and materials that are going to be seen by the camera and not worry too much about anything that's outside of this field of view. Okay, I think the next thing I want to tackle is lighting. So the issue right now is that these windows are completely opaque, so we're not getting any natural light coming into this room. So what we need to do is select all of these window panes and apply a glass material. Before I make that selection, let's go ahead and get our material ready. So what I would do, because I have Podium Browser, is come up to Extensions, Podium Browser, and I would use the Podium Browser Thin Glass, which is under Materials, Transparent, and then I would just use Window Pane. So I click that to download it into the scene, and it comes in on a material cube. And if I open up the Podium Material Properties dialog and then color pick this glass, we can see what the material properties are. 3 diffuse, 85 transparency, and 12 reflection. Now, if you don't have Podium Browser, I've just given you the settings, so what you can do is come up to create a new, oops, that's styles. Let me scroll up to materials, go to create a new material, type it new glass, okay. And now that we have this new material selected, you could just use those same exact material settings. And actually, they're already showing up because I had that material selected when I created the new material. So either way, if you have Podium Browser, use the window pane, or if not, use these settings and create it yourself. So I've got this material in my scene. I'm just gonna move it out of the way for a second here. Now what I want to do is select the window panes. So let me zoom over here. I think all of these are separate faces, so give me 1 second. Okay, I'm gonna get the paint bucket, hold down Alt to get the eyedropper, and select that glass material. And then I'm just gonna paint this on my windows. So now that I've painted this on my windows, we've achieved our goal. There's light coming through, although I'm not sure. Let me make sure that's on the other side too. Okay, there we go. So I only had one side of that face selected, and so the back face was still opaque. I just had to swing right outside and use the paint bucket on the outside as well. Okay, so our glass is set up. I'm gonna right click on these, make a group, and we should be all set. So now when we want to turn on the sun, I'm gonna delete this material cube. I can just turn on SketchUp shadows. Actually, let's go back into our scene and set up shadows. So we're in our render camera. I come up here, turn on shadows, and now we just need to find a position that we like. That actually doesn't look bad to me, but obviously if I move these around, we get different sun and shadow positions. So we can just position these however we want. I think that's kind of a nice, we're going to get a nice hot light spot right here under this chair, which I think will end up looking pretty good in the render. So what I'm going to do is come up to the scene, right click and say update. And so now our shadow position is saved with that SketchUp scene. If you really wanted to play around with it and try a few things out, you could change the date. And now we're getting light from the other direction. About over here. I sort of liked the original best. This sort of has a nice feel. Well, there we go. I think the light coming across might be a nice alternative, so I'm going to bring this back toward mid-afternoon, and I'm just going to save a second scene. No reason not to. Okay, that does it for natural light. So I know we haven't set up any materials yet, but why don't we go ahead and take a test render and just see what this image is looking at with what we've done so far. But before I do that, I want to take care of these trees, because right now they're not set up as face me components, so we're just seeing the back of the trees through the window. If I drill into this group, select this, make it into a component, and then say always face camera, and click create. That should, yeah, okay, so now that tree is always going to face the camera, and I'm going to do the same thing to the smaller one. So right click, make component, always face camera, click OK. And now when I go back to scene 1, it's actually, the environment layer is turned off, but I'm going to turn it back on, and we can see now those trees are facing the camera as they should be. So for a test render, let me go up to the options dialog. I think everything is actually pretty much set up. So we've only got light coming in through the one window here. So instead of interior default, I'm going to use the interior bright default, since that's the only light source. I'm just going to render at viewport for this preview test render. Under environment, we're using Podium Physical Sky 1, intensity and exposure at default levels. Everything looks good. So back to output, make sure we're saving in the model folder, PNG, click save, and then I can just click the render button and we'll see what it looks like. All right, that finished in about 1 minute and 36 seconds. I can click show to see a little preview in the window here, or I can click edit to open it in Podium Image Editor and see it just a little bit bigger. So there it is. And I'd say it looks pretty good for the amount of work that we've done. I mean, all that we've done so far is taken the windows and given them some transparent glass and then turned on the sun. We still need to work on materials and we still need to work on artificial lights, but this is a really nice start. So I'm just gonna close Podium Image Editor and click clean up, close OOPR, and we can move on to artificial lighting next. The next thing we need to talk about is artificial lights. So this was one of the big questions that the user had when handing this model over. He wanted to know how he could get the light fixtures to glow using a light emitting material. So that seems straightforward, and it really is, but because this model is from Chief Architect, we have a couple sort of tricky things happening. So if I zoom in on these, let me turn shadows off so the viewport's a little more responsive. If I zoom in on these recessed lights and open my Podium Material Properties palette, color pick this material. You see it's called Auto 7. Okay, so this material is Auto 7 on this light face, but it's also on the rim. It's also on these cabinets, not on the wall. It's on the door. It's on these window frames. So the point that I'm making here is if I come up here and give this Auto 7 material light emitting properties, not only are these lights going to glow, all of these other objects that use that material are also going to glow. So that's going to cause us to end up with a really blown out, terrible looking render. I mean, I can even show you. Color pick that material, and let's give this a light power of 10. Click apply, close, and let's go back to scene 1 and open up the options dialog. The only change I'm actually going to make is I'm going to take this down from interior bright to interior default. Everything else is good. Click save, and let's see what this looks like. I'm warning you, it's not going to be good. All right, 2 minutes and 4 seconds later, here is our masterpiece, except it's looking completely wrong. And the reason for this, of course, is that when Chief Architect exported this model, it automatically assigned any untextured surfaces with some automatic materials. And so anything in this model that's using automatic material number 7 is now emitting light because we gave that material a light power of 10. So the way we solve this is to put a unique material on those light surfaces. So I'm going to close Podium Image Editor, clean up and close this again, and what we need to do is zoom in on these light fixtures, select these light surfaces, and assign them with a unique material. So the other option would be to replace these fixtures with something from Podium Browser, but the user specifically wanted to see how to set up these light surfaces. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the process, and I'll show you how to get these things emitting light. What we need to do is drill down into the group. We can just triple click this light surface. Thankfully, it's not connected to the rim, so I can just make a selection out of this and these other two as well. And now we can just repaint them. So we come up to the materials tray, click create new material. I'm going to call this recessed LEM. Click OK. We'll just stick with a white color. Now we've got this recessed LEM. I'm going to grab the paint bucket, paint this on these light surfaces. And so now if I were going to grab the color picker, you can see the ceiling is Auto 19, the rim is Auto 7, but we have recessed LEM on these light surfaces. So now we can give this a light power. One thing I do need to do though is remember we had a light power of 10 assigned on automatic 7. Need to make sure that's turned off. So color pick that rim, make sure Auto 7 is selected, and just take this back down to 0 and 100% diffuse. Click apply. And these lights are set up. We've got recessed LEM on these light surfaces, light power of 10, apply, and I'm going to go back to scene 1, and we'll take a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to just click out of that group, and I'm just going to click render one more time, and we're going to see what this looks like. Okay, that took 1:30, and there you have it, my friends. We have glowing lights. So that was a little bit trickier than it normally would be to set up, but it wasn't really hard. All we had to do was go up to those recessed light surfaces, triple click to select, and then paint them with a unique material. So we've got the recessed lights set up. If we wanted the chandelier and the suspended light to do the same thing, we would just repeat the process. So let's do the chandelier. Now, it's a good idea not to reuse the same LEM material in case we want one to have a different light power than the other, or if we want to turn one off but not turn the other off. So what I'll do is just click create new material, basically to duplicate this into a second one. So I'm going to rename this material chandelier, click OK. And so now chandelier is still going to have a light power of 10 or higher or lower if we want. But now we can edit one without editing the other. So I'm going to just save that and close it. And let's zoom in on these candles and see what we can do. I say candles, but you know, you get the idea. Okay, so it looks like this surface is bare. It's not grouped. So let me just triple click and see what happens. And again, this isn't connected to the rest of the geometry. So we're getting pretty lucky with these. I can just hold shift, triple click again, triple click, oops. There we go. And this time I think I'm going to right click and group these. Okay. Go back into that group. Now if I do a drag selection, I can get them all at once. So let me paint these. Chandelier. We're all set. And you know what? Just to give this a little bit of a different flair, why don't I close this, and instead of using a white color, let's go to Edit. I like to use HSB instead. And let's make this a little bit warmer. So just give it a tiny bit of saturation. The scene is already pretty warm, but we'll see how this looks. So close that, go back to scene 1, and I'll make yet another test render. Okay, and there we have it. Now, one thing I will mention is that light power of 10 is probably too low to make a significant difference in the overall illumination level of this part of the scene. So I personally, this is personal taste, I tend to like to emphasize natural light instead of artificial light. So this is just something you have to play around with in your own projects and decide on, but if you wanted less influence from the sky and more influence from the artificial lights, obviously what you could do is increase the light power and maybe add some hidden LEMs. But for this demo, I'm actually thinking about leaning the other way. What I might do is turn off the chandelier and increase the brightness of the light coming in from outside. So I'm gonna switch from the interior default preset to the interior bright preset, and then maybe move the sun and shadows closer to noon so that the intensity of the sun is a little bit brighter. Or what we could do is just come into the options under the environment tab and just increase the intensity and exposure a little bit so that it feels like that sun coming in is a little bit more intense. These are all things that you just have to get used to testing out in your own projects. But for now, I'm going to call natural and artificial lighting finished, or at least at a good stopping point, and we can start working on the materials for this scene, because right now the materials are just looking a little bit dead and bland. So let's go ahead and assign some material properties. All right, so there's not actually that much we have to do in this scene in terms of materials. For the most part, we just need to get reflection where we need it. So I'm looking around the scene, and we need to get some reflection on the floor, on this granite countertop, probably on this backsplash, this light fixture, and then there's a few bits of chrome spread around the scene. So why don't we just dive into it? I'm pretty comfortable referencing Podium Browser since this video is going to be published with version 2.6, and Podium Browser is included with SU Podium version 2.6. That's going to be a resource for most people that are watching this video. But since we already have textures on all of these objects, we can use the existing materials for the stuff that's already textured. So I'll grab my materials palette, eyedropper, get that floor, and why don't I change the name on this at least so it's not auto 44. We'll just say kitchen floor. Let that update. Okay, and we just need to give it some reflection and make sure that it's blurred. So I think a kitchen floor should be around, I think about 13 is good. You know, you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference between 10 and 15, but somewhere in that range. If you want it a little bit more reflective, go ahead and increase it, but just make sure blurred reflection is checked. Residential wood floors tend not to have a super high polish, and if we don't check blurred reflection, it's going to look like a mirror. So just make sure that's checked and click apply. If you weren't sure what the values were supposed to be, you could just come into Podium Browser and reference the material library. So under materials, if I scroll down to wood floors, which is way down at the bottom, and then let's look at something similar. That burl isn't too dissimilar, so let's download that and see what the settings are. It's a little bit darker, but I bet the material properties are going to be almost exactly the same. So sample that. Okay, so it's 85 diffuse and 15 blurred reflection. So that's just a little bit more reflective than what my instinct was. So why don't I click this and we'll just match the Podium Browser item. So set that to 15, click apply, and I'm going to get this out of the scene. For the rest of these, I think I'm just going to go on instinct. So let's grab this, color pick that. I'm going to rename it from auto to countertop and click apply. Wait for that name to update. Yeah, there we go. And let's give that a reflection. It should be pretty reflective. So like, whoops. Let's say like 14, 86 and 14. Click apply. I'm going to leave blurred reflection unchecked and see how it looks. Okay, for the ceiling, there's only one thing I want to do. Wood planks. Apply. I want this to be 100% diffuse because these wouldn't really be reflective, but I do want to give them a bump depth of, let's say, 20. And that's just going to emphasize the cracks between. What it does is converts this image to grayscale and uses it as a bump map. And so these darker sections are going to appear to recede or be recessed, as they would be if these were actual planks. So get this eyedropper again, and what else? This little metal strip, I'm just going to call it metallic band. In this case, I want to change the material type from default to metallic, and I don't think this would be mirror-like. I think it would be mildly reflective, sort of like a brushed metal or something like that. I don't know how to explain it. Let's just say 9. Nope. 9. As you can see, I'm really winging it. If I was really going to take the time, what I would do is open up Podium Browser and try and find the closest possible material for all these different items, and either reference it or replace the materials altogether. But in this case, I'm going to use metallic 9, and let's actually check blurred reflection on that. A lot of times you'll have painted metal it's not mirror-like, but it does have a little bit of subtle reflection, and that's what I'm going for with this. So click apply. On this, I'm just going to call this chrome. I think this would be pretty reflective. So yeah, auto 6, chrome. We're going to go 80. Let's go even higher. 90. 90 reflection, 10 diffuse. Blurred unchecked. Oops. Click apply. What else? I'm sort of torn on, do these all use the same? Auto 49, auto 49, auto 49. Okay, so this is an instance where I think if we were actually gonna take the time to do this correctly, these materials would actually not be the same. Usually a crossbeam isn't gonna be the same material as your kitchen table. So I could maybe, I'm gonna leave it for now and just leave it without any reflection and see how it looks. But if that doesn't look good, what we might do is replace this material on the table and give it something with something really low reflection, so that it has a little bit of a subtle shine to it, maybe like 5% reflection. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as is. The one other thing that I do want to do is, okay, that's already got the chrome on it. Good. The reason that already says chrome is because that shared a material with the door and with the hanging light fixtures. So we got those for free. This countertop. Anything else? Chrome. We're not going to see that in the render, but it's pretty good. Chrome on the sink or on the tab. Okay, we do need to do this backsplash though. So I'm going to give this a bump depth of 15, we'll say. 5. I think it would be pretty subtle if we saw it at all. So keep that at 15. I'm going to use a reflection of 10 and see how it looks. Click apply. Actually, let's reference that. I'm not really sure what the settings should be on a kitchen tile. So let me go into Podium browser. I want to back out of the wood flooring and go back to materials. And let's scroll down to tiles. So tiles, floor, granite, mosaic, wall tiles. See all. And let's just see if I can find something similar. I don't think these are quite what I'm looking for. These are all terracotta. Okay, this is getting closer. So let's see. Those are stone. We're looking for more of a ceramic, like a glossy ceramic. Let's see what settings this uses. I think that's pretty close. Okay, so come up here, color pick this material, Florida tile. It's using 85-15, no blurred reflection. And what was I using? 90 and 10. Okay, so let's increase the reflection up to 15. I am going to keep that bump and see what it looks like, and we're just going to rename this backsplash. Click apply. Okay. Get rid of this. And I think the last one that we need to do is this light fixture. I'm going to use the same settings for this actually. Just 15 reflection, no blurred reflection. And I'll call this pendant. Apply. Close. And I think that's going to do it for materials. I went through that pretty fast, but there was nothing hard about it. All I was doing was adding varying levels of reflection. So let's go back to scene 1 and take a look at how things changed. Before I make another test render though, I want to make a change. I'm just gonna turn off the LEM on the chandelier, and then I'm gonna increase the brightness of the sun. So let me bring this down to 0, close, go back to scene 1. And if I bring this closer to noon, the sky should actually get brighter and less warm, less yellow, toward the beginning and the end of the day, Podium Physical Sky 1 gets, it starts to take on tones similar to a sunset or a sunrise. So the closer to noon we get, the brighter the sun gets and the more intense. I think I can lengthen those shadows by making this sort of more of a winter feel. Yeah, cool. Let's try that. I'm going to right click on the scene and say update to save that shadow position. And the last thing I want to do, we'll see how much brighter this gets. I'm going to go from interior default to interior bright default under environment tab. I'm just going to bring the exposure and intensity up to about 77. This is going to make the image noticeably brighter, I think. But I was noticing in some of those earlier test renders that it was pretty dark and shadowy, so let's see what we're working with. I want to save before I do this because we've made a lot of changes here. So let me just click save. And then we'll go ahead and produce a test render. So click the render button and I'll see you in a second. All right, that test render took 2 minutes and 4 seconds at viewport resolution, and let's bring it up in Podium Image Editor, and there we go. It's starting to look pretty nice. It's looking like a nice sunny afternoon. And as you can see, the materials are starting to take shape. So we've got this blurred reflection on the floor. I think I may go back and add a little bit of bump to that floor texture. We've got the reflection on the granite and the backsplash over here, the chrome on this tap, and on the candlestick. We're not really seeing reflections on the door, but that's a pretty small object. We're seeing some reflections up here on this chrome material. So all those changes that we made really paid off. There's nothing I would obviously change. We could maybe try a little bit more reflection on the floor, but I don't think that's necessarily bad. This could maybe go up or down, but I don't really see a reason to change it. So I'm pretty happy with where this is in terms of materials. Let's see what other changes we can make to push this a little bit further, though. So I'm going to close Podium Image Editor. And one thing I'm noticing is this scene has a lot of regularity to it. So why don't we select these chairs? I'm going to have to zoom in. I want to add some subtle variation to the way these chairs are placed and rotated. So this is a tool called Nudge, and it's in the extensions menu under Podium Extras Nudge. So let me select all of these chairs. And here's what we're going to do. Come into extensions, open up that nudge plugin, go to nudge settings. The first thing I want to do is raise these off the ground by about 2 millimeters. And that's the reason we do that is to create what's called a contact shadow. It's sort of just, it helps ground the item and add a tiny little bit. It's a very, very subtle detail to the render that you wouldn't necessarily notice, but it sort of helps sell the realism. So all I'm going to do is grab the move tool and just move these up on the Z-axis 2 millimeters. And that should be good. Control T to deselect. Actually, I want to keep those selected, so let me grab those one more time. Okay, I've got all these selected. I want to add random variation to the rotation. So what I need to do is set this to 0. Actually, I think I can just uncheck. And we'll just, under rotation, I want to make sure it's only rotating on the Z-axis. Uncheck X. I want these to rotate, only around the vertical axis. So what we're doing is we're adding random rotation. So I'm going to take this rotation percentage and set it to about, let's say 12%. Save. And now I come into the contextual menu, right click, nudge objects. Oh, okay, so I think 12% was too much. We got a nice, so that definitely broke up the uniformity. But I think I want to be a little bit more subtle than that. So let me go back into nudge settings, and let's just cut that in half actually to 6. Say save, right click, nudge objects, and I think that's good. You can always, since it's completely random, you can try it as many times as you want until you have a result that you like. But let me go back, nudge objects. Okay, this is my favorite result yet. So it took 3 tries, but we finally got something. And then the last thing I'm going to do, because I don't like the tangent between this chair and this window, I'm going to grab the move tool and just move it to the right. Good. That just feels, it just feels better to me. There's no explaining it. Okay, so I'm going to save one more time, and then we can move on to the next item. Okay, what's next? I did want to come in and modify the floor material, so I'm going to color pick that. And remember, I wanted to give it a little bit of bump depth, so I'm just going to give this a value of 10. We may not even notice a difference, but it's worth it to try. So I'll click apply and close. And what else do we need to change? You know, in that last test render, I noticed that the light around these windows was extremely bright, and I realized that I had turned off the environment layer. So let's turn that back on. And I'm just going to go back to scene 1 and see where the trees are showing up. Oh, well, that's why it was turned off, because it's turned off in this layer. So let me turn that on and right-click on scene and say update. And so from now on, the environment layer is going to be turned on when I move to scene 1. Okay. So we're not seeing the ground at all, but we're seeing the trees. I like where these two are positioned, but I think this one could maybe come back a little bit further. So let me go outside and get into this group. Hit M to access the move tool. I don't want to cast too much of a shadow, but I do want to see that tree through the window. So let me try right there. Back to scene 1 and see what it looks like. Yeah, okay. I think I like what's going on there. Let's see if we can extend the ground plane and see it in the window. I think the best way to do this, let me turn off shadows so this is a little bit faster. I think if I just extend this, we may end up seeing some repetition, and I might not like how it looks, but I'm going to grab the move. Oh, well, we don't need to extend the foundation. So instead of doing that, we'll just grab the push-pull and bring this out as far as it needs to go. So we'll try that. Double-click to repeat. And let's see how that looks. Okay, that's actually much better. So we're getting a little bit of a horizon line. We can do the same thing on this side now, because I was seeing the edge. P. Okay, finally. So that should be good enough. I think we can go further out even with this edge. Oh, goodness. Maybe if I turn shadows off, it'll be a little bit more responsive. Okay, back to scene 1. Click out of the group. And yeah, I think that'll do. Now, it sort of ends abruptly, so the last thing we could maybe try for this exterior is I'm going to come into Podium Browser, So what I wanted to do was add a secondary tree line. Now, the vegetation we see up here in the top row, these are actually 3D trees, and I think that will slow the scene down more than I want. So instead, I'm going to come into the menu and go to Environment. Where is it? Environment. Let that load. And then I'm going to search through this Backgrounds 180 section. So let's click See All. And I think I just want a pretty plain tree line. So none of these urban scenes. So those are all the options. Let's just go with this one right here. I'm going to click the download button. Let that come into the scene. This may take a second because they're pretty big image files. So it's about 75% done. Okay, and as you can see, it's pretty big and it's facing the wrong direction. So let me just place it right there, grab the rotate tool, and let's put this just like that. And then move it right up to the edge. Okay, I think that'll be good enough to give us a little bit more context out that window. So let me go back to scene 1. And yeah, let's go ahead and give that a try. So I'm going to save. And let's make another test render. Click render. Okay, and here we are. Yeah, I think that helped. I know some people do tend to like the fully white blown out windows look. But for this kind of image, I think the tree line in the background and a few trees in the yard here actually really works pretty well. So this is getting pretty close to finished. The only other thing we could maybe do is the edges on these beams are kind of sharp. So if you have Fredo RoundCorner installed, you could add a bevel or a chamfer to these. There's already... In the real world, most objects are not infinitely sharp. They have either a bevel or sometimes we call it a chamfer, which just means the edge is rounded off. It's not a perfectly sharp edge. Same thing on this bench here. But a lot of the edges in this scene aren't beveled, so this would be an easy example to do. Okay, so I'm going to select this top face on the counter, and I'm going to grab the bottom face too. And then this plugin is called Fredo RoundCorner. He's a pretty well-known SketchUp developer with a ton of plugins. If you just go to the extension warehouse and search Fredo RoundCorner, you'll find it. Okay, so there it is, RoundCorner by Fredo 6. You have to install libfredo also. It's a plugin library with some common dependencies. But anyway, you get the idea. That's the plugin that I'm using. I'm going to close Extension Warehouse, and the tool I'm using is called RoundCorner. RoundCorner is in 3D. So if I select this, it's going to give me a bunch of options. We just set the number of segments and the offset. So I'm going to zoom in here on the edges. Right now my offset is set to 1/16 of an inch. So the corner that we put on this surface is going to be 1/16 of an inch. I could increase this to, let's say, what does 2 millimeters look like? Is a little bit wider. 3 millimeters, you can see it getting wider. And if we increase the number of segments, that's the number of edges it's going to put on this corner. 2 is plenty for this, though. And I actually think 2 millimeters is going to look pretty good as well. So all you have to do is, well, normally all you have to do is click off into space, but I just realized this only works on grouped geometry. So what I have to do is select this whole thing, right click, and make it a group. And now I can go in, grab the top face, bottom face, round corner. Okay, now it's going to let me click off. So I click off into space. I see that check mark, click to execute. and you can see what it did was rounded off the corner. This screwed up the texture mapping a little bit on that material, but I don't think we're going to notice it in the render, and this could help us pick up some nice highlights on this countertop. So let me close that and deselect. The other place I would consider using this is on these wooden beams. And there's a lot of them, so I don't think I'm going to go through all of it for this demonstration, but this is starting to get pretty long, so why don't we go ahead and put the final touches on and call this thing finished. So I have changed my mind one last time. I want the chandelier to be turned on. So when I had paused the recording, I actually went and gave this, I'm going to bump it way up to about 50. I noticed there was less light coming in through the windows after I put that tree line background in, and the scene got a little bit dimmer. So what I did was I put 50 light power back on the chandelier, and then I also came into the options and I left the intensity where it was, but I'm just going to increase the exposure all the way to the top. So save that. We're still using interior bright default. And then the final thing that we could maybe try, and I'm not sure how this will look, but if you have a scene that you think is too dim, the best way to add illumination is to use an LEM panel. So I just want to demonstrate that for the sake of the video. I think I'm going to try and get a little bit of extra light into the kitchen. So what I'm going to do is draw a square. I'm actually going to do it outside so it doesn't get attached to anything. Let me zoom all the way out. You'll see what I'm doing in 1 second. So I'm just going to draw a vertical rectangle. That's actually not a bad size, right like that. I need to double click this, turn it into a group, make a group. That way it's not going to intersect with anything, and now I'm going to move it into the kitchen. And once again, if I turn shadows off, this will go a little bit faster. So let's see where this ended up. For now, I think I can just turn the roof off. And there it is. So I want this to be not sitting on the floor like that. I'm gonna lift it up a little bit. The idea is this is like a softbox that a photographer would use. So I'm gonna rotate it just like that. I think that's about where I want it. Not where I want it, but where I want it rotated. I'm going to put it right here. Move it a little bit further over. And how's that? That might actually work. So make it a little bit wider. Let's see how that looks. So I'm not going to use any of the existing LEMs. I want this to be relatively low powered. So come up to materials, go to create material, just say softbox. I'm just going to use a white, hit OK. And then I'm just going to apply this to the entire face. So grab my paint bucket. You know what, actually this is the reverse face. So right click, reverse faces. And now I'm gonna triple click and grab this paint bucket, paint that on my softbox, and 50 is too strong. So let's give it a light power of, let's see what 8 looks like. Click apply and close and go back to scene 1. Okay, so to recap the changes that we made, I turned the chandelier back on, I added a softbox, and I increased the exposure all the way up to 100. So save. I'm going to save one final time, and we're going to see how this looks. And if that doesn't look too good, I can always go back and we'll use the previous lighting. So test render. And there it is. And I think I like the changes. Let's view this a little bit larger. Yeah, okay. So it's a little bit brighter than the kitchen, and I think that actually helps the image. We're getting this reflection on the tiles, which I don't know how accurate it is to the real world, but I think it looks kind of interesting. What we're seeing is a reflection of the LEM panel, because I forgot to make it a hidden LEM. But I don't think it's necessarily bad. That could easily just be another window being reflected. So if there was a window behind the camera, it would look exactly like that. There's not, but I think I'm going to leave it as it is. If I did want that LEM to still cast light but be hidden, all I would need to do is come into the LEM properties. So with the materials, color pick, and I could just check hidden, and that would be invisible to the camera, but it would still cast light. But I'm just going to leave it right as it is, and I think we're going to go ahead and call this finished. So what I want to do is come up into the gear icon, come from interior bright default to interior bright high. So I'm ready to move from a preview render to a final render. And the other thing I need to do is bump up my resolution from viewport to something larger, something worthy of a finished image. So I just want to find out real quick what my viewport resolution was. And I can do that by going to File, Export 2D Graphic, and go to Options. So my view size is 1544 by 903. And I just need to scale that up. So let me uncheck that and see. Let's see, 4000 by 2339. I'm going to use that. So I'll just hit cancel, cancel. Under options, I go to fixed 4000 by, was that right? 2033? I think so. I can double check later, but what I would do is click save, use interior bright default, PNG model, everything's good, click save, and then I would just let this run overnight. It's going to increase the render time substantially. So the test render was about 2 minutes and 50 seconds. I think the final image is probably going to be at least 40 minutes to an hour, I would assume. Let me start this render after I finish the video, and then I think I'm going to do one more segment on post-processing, but I'll see you guys after this finishes rendering. Hey guys. Alright, so this is going to be the last section of the video. We're going to take a look at the raw render from Podium and then just do a little bit of post-processing on it to produce a final image. So I've got the image right here on my hard drive, and I think it's looking pretty good. Remember, this was created with the interior bright high preset using a resolution of about 4000 by 2339, I think. And it's looking pretty nice. Now, we can do some changes in post-processing to sort of, I think we'll end up brightening the image a little bit. This, I think, is pretty appealing as sort of a late afternoon, nice cozy lighting. You know, I could imagine myself sitting at this table drinking coffee and reading a book or something like that, but this isn't necessarily how real estate images are typically presented. So if that's our goal, if that's the goal that we have in mind, I think probably we would brighten this up in post. So let me just close this. I don't have it open in OOPR anymore, so we can't just click the edit button, but I can open Podium Image Editor manually. So I'm going to close the render manager and just go to extensions, SU Podium version 2.6, Tools, Image Editor. And this opens Podium Image Editor from the top menu, and now we just need to open that file. So I go to File, Open, and it's on my D drive. Okay, so I open that, and there we go. I'm just going to maximize Podium Image Editor, and there. Okay, so if you haven't used the image editor before, it's pretty much just a simplified version of something like Photoshop. So, we can alter the brightness and contrast, sharpen, vignetting, change the color balance however we want. I think what I'm going to do is, I don't like to use the auto levels because I think it goes a little bit too far sometimes, but what I might do is move it to the left, and I'm bringing a little bit more light into the room. And using the brightness slider sort of does the same thing, but as you can see, we're kind of washing out the image a little bit. So I'm gonna bump the contrast at the same time. I'm worried it's gonna get a little bit too saturated. So I could bring the saturation down if I think those red tones are starting to be a little bit too much. I'm actually not used to using Podium Image Editor. I mostly post-process in Photoshop, but I just wanted to show you that these tools are available. If we wanted to change the temperature of the image, we'd probably use the white balance slider. So this is going to tint it toward a warmer, sunnier looking image. That kind of looks nice, but I think it's stylized. And then this cools it down if I move it to the right. It takes a second to update, but there we go. Yep, so you get the idea. Let's see what happens if I can click apply. So in order to save changes, you just click apply. And that sets everything back to the middle. That means those changes have been saved in RAM. It hasn't actually been saved to an image file yet. In order to do that, you have to go to File, Save. But I just want to see what happens if I click the auto levels. So that really bumps up the contrast, but it's giving me unrealistic saturation on the floor and in these beams, in my opinion anyway, or at least on my monitor. But sharpen. We don't want to over sharpen. But you get the idea. So that's Podium Image Editor. And as I said, if I wanted to save my changes, I would go to Save and just save it to the disk in either JPEG or PNG. But I do want to show you what I worked on while the camera wasn't recording. So I'm going to hit cancel, close this, and I have the same file open in Photoshop now, because this is what I'm used to using. So this was the original render from Podium, just before any post-processing has been done. And I'm just sort of going to walk through the process that I took to my final image. So the first thing I usually do is a levels adjustment. And basically, I correct the white balance at the same time. So you can see this is my levels adjustment layer. But what I really did was, if I copy this into a new document, paste, I use image, layer, new adjustment layer, levels. Okay. And then the first thing I do is use these eyedroppers to work on the light balance. So this sets the white point. Take the eyedropper. It's relatively obvious that the white point in this image is somewhere over here. But I think if I click here, nothing is really going to happen, right? So what I sometimes do is pick a point that's just below white and see how I like it. So I would sample this right here. And that sort of had the effect that I wanted. It took away the red color cast and brought these walls back toward white. Okay, so that was the first step. That was the change from this to this. It already makes the room feel a little bit brighter. I probably will... You can take the right handle and drag it to the left to compress the histogram a little bit. You don't want to go too far with it, right? I don't want the image to feel overlit, but I think if I go right to about here and then take the center and drag it, yeah, like right there, I think is pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to call that first adjustment layer done. So that was my first levels adjustment. Okay, I'm going to go back to my master file though. So after levels, which it looks like I actually was even a little bit more extreme with it in this version, but that's okay. So after levels, I did a contrast adjustment to bring back some of these dark values in the vertical beams. Contrast is pretty obvious. It's just a slider like we saw. Image, adjustments, brightness, contrast. All I did was took the contrast slider and moved it to the left a little bit. Oops, that was on the background layer. Okay, so after contrast, I did a curves adjustment. And this time my objective was to raise the brightness in the light values. So I can show you that sort of real quick. I'll go to layer, new adjustment layer, curves. Oops, did I hit levels? I did. Layer, new adjustment layer, curves. Okay, there we go. So I wanted more light in sort of the left side of the image. So what I do is you place a control point. The right side of the image corresponds to the brighter values, and the left side of the curve corresponds to darker values. So if I took this curve point and brought it down, it would mean I was darkening the shadows, but that doesn't look good at all. You want to be pretty subtle with the curve. So all I did was placed a curve point up here in the upper right and pulled it upward. So it's subtle, but you can see how we're just getting a little bit more light on the ceiling and over toward the window. I'm not totally crazy about how I've blown the window out. So something that I could do, well, we're probably not going to get it back, but the nice thing about adjustment layers in Photoshop is it comes with a layer mask. So right here in the layer stack on the right side, you see this white square. Anything that's white in this mask is applying the layer adjustment basically. And these are, so if it's white, it's applying it to the entire image. But if I come over here, get a black color and a paintbrush, and I select the layer mask, I can brush out the parts of the image that I don't want to be affected by that adjustment layer. So if I increase the size of this brush and make it as soft as possible, and then bring the opacity down to like maybe 50%, I can click over the window here and take away some of the over illumination that we were seeing. Okay, so I just brought back some of those values. It's not a huge difference, but I think it works. Okay, this isn't looking bad at all. So what did I do next? Probably, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so there's a technique called bloom that I sort of like. What I do is I hit Control A, Shift Control C to select all, and then Control V to paste over the top of that. What we want to do is sort of enhance the light coming into the room with a little bit of a glow effect. You could actually just do this with a paintbrush, but what I do is I go to Image, Adjustments, Levels. I just crush this all the way down, so all that's left is the windows, basically. It looks really strange right now, but don't worry, we're gonna fix it. Okay, that's good. Then I go to Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation. I don't want those funky colors, so just bring the saturation all the way down. And what we're gonna do is set this layer to Screen. And so this is sort of reversing the entire point of painting those layer masks, but I just wanted to show you this technique. So now, when a layer is set to Screen, it's multiplying, not multiplying, but adding. It's adding illumination anywhere there are bright values in the image. So what's happening is, if you set this layer to Screen, the black values are disappearing, and the white values are being added to the image underneath. So I set this to Screen. It's adding brightness to these white spots, and I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and it's giving us this sort of, we call it bloom, but it feels like the lights are glowing a little bit. But you want to be subtle with it. What I try and go to about, I think right there is kind of good. And then I'm just going to back off the opacity of this layer all the way down to like 5%. It's not something you want to be over the top with. I don't actually like it too much in this case. What do we have over here? All right, well anyway, that's what I did on that bloom layer. I think it worked better on this image. Okay, after that I adjusted the high values again, which maybe that went too far. I tend to second guess myself a lot in post-processing, which that's probably just part of the process. Oh, actually, you know, I know what I was doing here. So I wanted to show one reason that I use Photoshop is so that you can create an effect and then reduce it with the opacity slider. That's one nice thing about working in layers like this, is that if I think this is too strong, I can bring it back down. So adjustment layer off, on, and there it is at like 50%. So if I just want a little bit more light on the ceiling, that's what I'm doing. Looks like I adjusted the contrast again to bring back just a tiny bit of the shadows in those vertical beams. And then the last layer I just called lens effects. I think what I did was added, it's called chromatic aberration. It's just a photographic effect to make the image feel more like a digital photo. We're adding an imperfection that photographers go to great lengths to remove. But the reason we do that is to make it feel like a photographic image. So you barely notice it in the final render, but if I zoom in on this pole, this is without the lens effect and this is with it. I'm seeing, you see that magenta fringe? So it's something I sometimes do. I don't always use it, but I would, if you're interested in learning that, just look up chromatic aberration on YouTube, and you should find some tutorials on that technique. I don't like the green, but I like the red fringe. Okay, anyway, so that was my post-processing approach to this. I'm going to turn off all these in-between layers and just show you the difference. So this was the original, which, I mean, I like it as much as the final, to be honest with you, but if you want something a little bit less, this definitely has a mood and an atmosphere to it. If you want something a little bit less moody and a little bit more neutral and bright, that's the difference. So late afternoon sun, more of a bright, people are working in the kitchen, getting stuff done type image. this is probably the one you put in your real estate catalog. Okay, I'm starting to ramble, so I'm going to wrap it up. That was the final render and the finished image. Let's go to View, Screen Mode, Full Screen. There we go. I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial and, learned something, got something out of it. And if you did, let me know. If you have any questions, also let me know. You can get in touch either in the comments or support@cataloginc.com on the Podium website. So, all right, thanks a lot. Have a good one.